Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you on this Tag Wednesday. it's supposed to be Tag Tuesday, but I made this tag yesterday and went off. I was about 10 minutes into it, and I went off on an editorial digression of epic length. I think I forgot the camera was even on. So that wasn't really workable. And then I saw today that Britta Bola uploaded a tag calling it Tag Wednesday, so I at least have a tiny bit of precedence. I was actually tagged in a tag yesterday by Brian at Bookish, my nemesis, my arch rival, my eyebrow baby, my Lee Harvey Oswald. It's the Fit for Reading tag, and it was created by SarahMG Reads, and it's all fitness related. So I thought we'd hurl ourselves into these prompts. Number one being Zumba. Name a twisty and turny book that was super fun to read. And here because I'm contemplating a reread, the one that came to mind was The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell, but it really could be any David Mitchell book, all of which are twisty and turny, and many of which have intertextual callbacks and private jokes and echoes of earlier books. Nothing that's going to get in the way, nothing that's going to make you feel like there's something going on that you need to know. They're pure gifts for his long-term fans. But he strikes me as the type of author that incubates a book and folds it and refolds it and refolds it many, many times before he's done with it. So Bone Clocks will work. I really liked it the 2 times that I've read it, so I want to read it again. Then number 2 is Crossfit. What was the most intense book you've ever read? I don't know that I could give this a single candidate, just a single thing, but I do have one that stuck out in recent years. It's by Jessica Pierce, and it's called The Last Walk, and it's about her memories of a beloved dog of hers, but also broader ruminations on what it means to say goodbye to these friends. If you're an adult dog owner, then you have probably gone through the absolutely surreal experience of watching a friend of yours grow from childhood to old age in what strikes you as a very handleable amount of time. And if you've gone through that experience, then you have reached the end. The end of that experience is, it is weird. It's trying and taxing, it's brutal, but it's also weird to people who don't have pets, and who expect to maybe go through this a couple of times when they lose each of their parents. But instead, this is, you watch the light get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. You start crossing things off the list of things you can no longer do with your old friend. You start crossing things off the list of things your old friend can no longer do alone. And then finally, you reach the end. I actually went through that on this channel with my 2 previous dogs, my pointer, Malin Moore, and my fat little basset hound, Lucy, where you cross a borderline between someone who's very old and someone who's very sick, and then someone who is dying. And there's no real way to encapsulate that experience in words, especially the people who've never gone through it. But Jessica Pierce does a great job trying. Her book is it's a very touching about her dog, but it's also a very good meditation on that horrible week. That horrible week when you suddenly realize that you are doing things for the last time with this particular dog. It worked on me, predictably enough. But I've read many, many books on the final years of a dog's life, on aging or ailing dogs, that don't work as well as this one does. So it still counts as a recommend. And then number 3, for number 3 and number 4, I want to stress something here that I'm sure you already know, but there are quite a few of you who are new. So I want to point out, mainly for the new people, that this little corner of BookTube, not all of BookTube, not the famous BookTubers, not the larger BookTubers, not that cadre of BookTubers I consider to be fairly weird, who seem completely insular. They don't seem to be, they make regular videos that are book related, but they have no interest in any kind of community at all. They wouldn't dream of answering their own comments. They don't do tags. They don't join in any events. They're just sort of insular channels. I'm not talking about all of that. The two things that I just described are hundreds and hundreds of channels. I'm talking about around 200 channels right here in this little neighborhood of BookTube, where we are deeply involved with each other. We're constantly dropping each other's names in videos, constantly laughing and poking fun at each other, constantly taking recommendations from each other, whether intentional or otherwise. This little corner of BookTube is most of what I watch, and I want to stress for the people who might be finding it new that we are not like the rest of BookTube and the rest of YouTube. We are capable of vigorous disagreement with each other without disliking each other. We're capable of excoriating each other's choices without excoriating each other. I want to stress that because my next few answers are a little on the contentious side. So, question number 3, or prompt number 3 is burpees suck. Name a book you hated. And before we get to the book, I want to stress here that if you Google burpees, you will see what this prompt is referring to. And I want to stress here that burpees doesn't just suck; it's really dangerous for your body. It is bro science raised to the level of actual medical malpractice. And it is entirely designed for 20-something male bodybuilding tobacco addicts who get bored with weightlifting. They're not really in this for health, obviously, or they wouldn't smoke. They're not really in this for anything other than grifting with exercise programs and things like that, for people who look at their bodies and think, well, I want to exercise my way to that body, when exercise isn't what got that person where their body is, and it isn't what keeps them there. What keeps them there is being in a caloric deficit. And they're not in a caloric deficit because they have a great strength of will. They're in a caloric deficit because they take an appetite suppressant, tobacco, in massive amounts. And I want to stress here before we get on to burpees that these guys, they all have YouTube channels, several of hundreds of thousands of subscribers, some with over 1 million. And when you watch them, they all have programs. They're all pushing supplements. They're all pushing any number of things. And when you watch them, I want to stress that it is the height of American-style corner-cutting stupidity to smoke yourself into good shape. Smoking causes lung cancer. It is, unless you are stripping old lining from 1940s buildings, it is the only thing that causes lung cancer. And lung cancer is a protracted and absolutely horrible way to die. And that's not even talking about how you live, counting paper tubes in a box all day long, every day, compulsively, measuring your whole life by how many paper tubes in a box you have. But burpees is designed by these guys, these bro tube guys, lifting gigantic tractor tires, flipping it over and then heaving it up and flipping it again, or those ridiculous cable hawsers, those thick ropes that you flip up and down like that, or throwing rocks, literally picking up a big boulder and throwing it onto the ground, and then picking it up and throwing it onto the ground again. I've seen videos of this sort of thing where the guys that do that, they pause every once in a while for their buddies to come over and punch them in the gut, or they hurl a rock onto the ground and then jump up onto a 4-foot tall box and then jump down again and hurl another rock. It's all boredom. It's all, they want to look cool doing real tough superhero-y things, but it's really bad for your body to do different kinds of exercises for different groups of muscles at the same time or in rapid succession. That is really bad for your body. The only reason these guys get to do it and get away with it is because they're not exercising when they're 50. They're going to be in hospitals when they're 50. Anyway, the answer that I have for a book that you hated is a book that is loved in certain corners of BookTube. It's Transcendent Kingdom by Yagi, the author of Homegoing, that was hysterically praised on BookTube a couple of years ago. Just yesterday, I saw a video from Greg at Supposedly Fun, a fantastic channel, smart, insightful, in which he mentions Transcendent Kingdom by Yagi, which he just finished, and says that he hopes that it's in the running for the Nobel Prize in Literature, but that at the very least it deserves the Pulitzer Prize. And I want to offer, again, in the spirit of this little corner BookTube where we can vigorously disagree with each other, I want to offer an opposing view, which is that Transcendent Kingdom is awful. Absolutely awful. It is a droning, one-dimensional, most of all condescending work of plotless fiction. It's populated by one-dimensional characters. The only reason that a bandwagon exists for this author for reviewers to jump on, and don't get me wrong, Greg is not alone in praising this book. Ron Charles is an old hand at the Washington Post, and he loved it. Sam Sachs at the Wall Street Journal is one of the best critics of contemporary fiction working today, and he loved it. And they aren't alone. There are plenty of other people that did. Nevertheless, it stinks. And the only reason I believe that it is being given such extravagant praise on and off BookTube is because Yagi Yassi is in a Venn diagram of authors about whom you cannot not praise them, or you're on the wrong side of history. Having nothing to do with the quality of their literature. Yagi Yassi, I believe, is slated for an entire career of praise for books that largely don't deserve it. And I 100% believe that if you extracted the essence of the plot, such as it is, of Transcendent Kingdom, and injected it into East Philadelphia, where the author's name is Brian McCann, and the main character's name is Phil Weston. So you change nothing except the surface, and you do that, where the author is a white man named Brian McCann, and the main character, going through the same kinds of existential crises, is named Ed Weston. I don't believe that Ron Charles or Sam Sachs or Greg at Supposedly Fun would have given it a second look. And if I'm right about that, then that says a lot about why they did give it a second look, and why they have allowed themselves to lavish on it such ridiculous levels of praise. Imagine saying that the just for showing up, I guess I'll accept it, consolation prize at the door for a novel is the Pulitzer Prize, but that really you deserve the Nobel Prize. So, and once again, I want to stress two things. One, we can disagree with each other here, or I'm going to do it in the next question as well. And two, I don't want you to take my word for it. Feel free to download a sample of Transcendent Kingdom from Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Feel free to get in line for 2 years at your library to borrow it. Feel free to go and buy it, if God forbid, and judge for yourself. Judge for yourself whether or not you think it is an incredibly talky and especially condescending novel that exists in such an atmosphere of complete praise only because of its author. Don't take my word for it. Try it yourself. You now know that there's a vigorous voice on both sides. And the next prompt is scarcely better. It's Intramural Sports. What book were you assigned to read for school, but you ended up liking it so much you couldn't wait to read it at night? And for me, it's a book that Brian, in his answer to this tag, or maybe it was the other tag, he did 2 tags back to back yesterday, doesn't like. And doesn't like for weird reasons that strike me as weird. It's The Red and the Black by Stendhal, which Brian says that he just didn't like. He holds up a beautiful little mass market paperback of it that looked brand new. It said didn't like it because the main character, Julian Sorrell, is a despoiler of people. He's a breaker of people. And I don't understand that. I stared at the screen because Brian admits in that same video that he has a huge sweet spot for the post-Napoleonic era of French literature, French novels, that was an almost uninterrupted glory age. I would say it ended right when Marcel Proust picked up his pen. But before that, you have one book after another, one author after another, creating these incredible masterpieces. And I would argue, and I bet I would have a lot of company, that The Red and the Black is a very strong container for the best book of that same period, of that same type of writing that Brian says he loves. And the reason why he doesn't like this great, great book is because the main character is a heel? Mystified me. The main character is supposed to be a heel. You're supposed to dislike him. That's not supposed to... Anyway, for me, it would be The Scarlet and the Black, which I read for the first time in English, not in French, and it blew me away. I just loved it. And then number 5 is Jogging or Running. Name a book that follows all the standard tropes, but you still enjoyed it. And for this, I want to go right back to BookTube. Right back to our little corner of BookTube. Charlie Heathcote has a BookTube channel. I'll leave a link to it down below. And he has done a series of novels, the R. Doris novels, very, very north of England humor, very charming stuff. I remember reading the first one, going into the first one thinking, okay, well, I know Charlie's sense of humor because he has a YouTube channel, a booktube channel, that is most famous for his wool gathering videos, which have his dry sense of humor on prominent display. But I had a sense of that. You know, if you watch somebody's videos over and over again, you get a sense of what their humor's like. I thought, okay, well, I think I know here what's going to go on. And I was pleasantly surprised that humor is all through the Doris books. But there's also a level of confidence that I wasn't expecting. Maybe that's the snob in me, because Charlie is very young and he's also a booktuber. Maybe, and he's self-publishing, all the usual levers to get me to discount a book. But I love the Doris books, and the book I want to talk about in answer to this prompt is not one of those. It's a murder mystery that he did. He did a very stereotypical English village murder mystery called An Heir to Murder that is wonderful. And that proves that a lot of those old gimmicks and old stereotypes are old for a reason. They're old because they work. So I want to recommend the book, and it's a perfect example. There isn't, no offense, of course, meant to Charlie when I say this, but there isn't anything new in An Heir to Murder. I think that's part of the point of it. It's just so well executed that you don't care at all. Then number 6 is Jazzercise, a book you enjoyed, that is out of date or published long ago. And I want to share a little here of Brian. Brian at Bookish expressed his outrage because Jazzercise to him seems very recent, and I would tend to agree with that. I also want to stress Jazzercise is a terrible way to exercise because jazz is not meant to be exercised to. Jazz is not written that way. It was not written with exercise in mind. Most of the guys that wrote classic jazz were 10-pack-a-day tobacco addicts who couldn't climb a flight of stairs without coughing up a river of blood. They certainly didn't exercise. And if you pattern exercise on something that isn't meant to be that way, you're going to do more harm than good. You should be looking at experts and figuring out what's a combination exercise, what's a single exercise, what's a slow or a fast exercise, which exercises work best in combination, which ones do actual damage in combination. Jazz isn't going to give you that. It's just, again, designed to alleviate boredom. And if you're easily prone to boredom, well, then weight training and exercising probably isn't for you. But there are many, many authors that I could name here, authors who were great in their day and are now totally forgotten. And one I want to stress here is William Hickling Prescott, who was a Boston historian 150 years ago, and who's fantastic. He really is fantastic. He is terrific to read. Probably there are hardly any genres out there that are more pitiless to older practitioners than history. Except with a tiny handful of exceptions, Macaulay or Hume or famously Edward Gibbon. But most often, not. Most often, if you even bring up that you were reading a history set, let's say a history of Byzantium that was written in the 1870s, if you even bring that up, before you can say anything about what its merits are, anyone you're talking to who knows anything about history is immediately going to say, can't you find anything more recent? Why would you read that? Because the genre of history and biography have sort of worked to bamboozle the public that newer is always better. And that's not true, obviously. The people in Prescott's day did an enormous amount of research, and they wrote with a greater eloquence than usually obtains today. And greater insight across many disciplines because they'd been raised in many languages. They knew poetry, they knew epic literature, whereas a lot of their modern historical counterparts do not. I don't think that Prescott is in print. I don't think he ever will be again, but I'm sure that all of his stuff is available on places like Project Gutenberg, and they might be worth your time. I wrote a couple of long essays about Prescott 10 or 15 years ago. I have no idea if those are findable. If I can find any of them to add inducement to this, I will try to link them down below. And then number 7 is Trampoline Class. I don't know why anybody. I don't trust trampolines at all. I love watching YouTube videos of various species of animal discovering a backyard trampoline, whether it's a bear or a bison or sheep or foxes. But I don't imagine using one myself. But anyway, what book do you absolutely love, but it's underrated? And this is a book that I've mentioned on this channel before. I'm going to champion it one more time. And it's Jaws 2. The novelization of the second Jaws movie. It was a novelization done by a hack of the first water, Harry Searles, who does a fantastic job. And the book has two things working against it. The first is that it's, well, three things actually. The first is that it's a novelization. A lot of readers, especially reading snobs, hate novelizations. The second is that it's a novelization of a sequel, and a lot of people just think automatically that any sequel to a movie as great as Jaws must be bad. Jaws 2 is actually very, very good. Far from being bad, it's very, very good. Very nearly as effective a movie as the first Jaws movie. And disadvantage number 3 is that even as an adaptation of a sequel, Searles was working on a script that didn't end up being the one that was used. So there are some key changes, key differences in the book, between the book and the movie. I strongly recommend the movie, but I strongly recommend the book as well. Because it tells a different story, and I think a much better story, more complex. I mean, the movie is really good, really complex. Roy Scheider, there are a couple of scenes in there, especially one in which a drunken Martin Brody returns home having been fired for the first time in his adult life, that is where Roy Scheider just knocks it out of the park. But the movie is all shark all the time. And the few people I know who have actually read the novelization by Harry Searles have said, well, the shark's not in it as much as it could be. And I always want to say to them, okay, you read it enough to notice that. Did you happen to notice what was in it in place of the shark? There's a novel in it. There's a plot in it. In the original Jaws, the novel, there is a land-based predator. Yes, there is a shark that is marauding this seaside town, but there's also a land-based kind of predation going on. It gets totally scrubbed from the movie, but it's an extramarital affair that Martin Brody's wife contemplates having with young Hooper, the oceanographer. And in Jaws 2, the script that Harry Searles was working off, there is also a land-based threat, a mobster trying to move into Amity. And the thing standing against him, at least partially, is Brody, a knight errant with his service revolver and his sense of right and wrong. And that is fleshed out really well in the book. The book is actually very enjoyable. And also, the key thing that people who've never seen Jaws 2 always remember is the quintessential marquee scene where the shark attacks a water skier. A woman is water skiing. She's in the poster for the movie. She's in the trailer for the movie. That scene is usually one that people have seen. It's not the best shark attack in the movie, but it's the one that people know. And the screenplay that Harry Searles was given does a much better job with that scene. In the movie, an older woman is piloting the boat with, I guess, a friend of hers is water skiing behind her. And the shark snatches the woman, and the woman in the boat realizes that she can't see her friend anymore, so she turns around, and the shark attacks the boat. Pretty effective. But not nearly as effective as the version in the novel, where it's a husband driving the boat. It's his wife water skiing, and he looks back and sees the fin. He knows she's in danger from a shark. That's not true in the movie, but it's true in the book, and it works wonderfully. So I wanted to recommend Jaws 2. Again, as with Transcendent Kingdom, I will say, test me. Test my recommendation and see if I'm wrong. I put an enormous amount of stock in my book recommendations. An enormous amount. I know perfectly well how much I'm risking when I go out on a limb against, I mean, you all love Greg. It's supposedly fun because he's so smart and he's so easy on the eyes. Eyes on the prize. Okay. I know that I'm going out on a limb to bash a book that he loves. And the same thing is true with The Scarlet and the Black, and the same thing is true with the novelization of Jaws 2. And in all those cases, and all the others, I want to stress, test it. Put me to the test. Try it. You can probably find a $1 copy of Jaws 2 on eBay, so that won't be hard to do. And if I'm wrong, if you read it and you don't agree with me, feel free to email me and ball me out. So that is it. That is the fit for reading tag. And all that's left to do is tag people. I have a bunch of people I want to tag. I want to tag the aforementioned Charles Heathcote. If you haven't tried his writing, and maybe you're worried because the Doris books are a series, plunk for An Heir to Murder. You will really enjoy it. And it's written by one of our own. I'll tag Steve Partridge, in case he ever gets a chance from all of his busy freelance working. Scallydandling about the books. Absolutely. Want to hear your answers. Bill Rutenberg at the Rutenberg Library, doing a lot of tags lately. I'm always up to add to that. Peg at the History Shelf. Love to hear your thoughts on exercise. Hannah's books, and of course Britta, who gave me the idea for Tag Wednesday. So that's it. That is our tag for Tag Wednesday. That sound you heard was the bell going off, the doorbell. So it could be that there's mail. If so, you'll be the first to know. I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.